In a normal interaction between a client and a server, a client make a HTTP request to the web server asking for a particular resource, be it an image, a web page, or any resource that is hosted on the web server. And then when that web server is off, that web server respond back with a status code and the content that the client is making a request for. So we have already explained this in the previous lecture. Now, in this type of scenario, the communication between the client and the server is direct. That is, the client make a direct request to the web server, and the web server make a response back directly to the client. Now, what happened in a web proxy server is that we have another server acting in the middle between the client and the web server. So whenever the client is making a request for a particular resource from the web server, the request does not go directly to the web server. Rather, the client request is channeled to the proxy server, and now the proxy server will now make a request on behalf of the client to the web server. And then the web server will now respond back to the proxy server, and then the proxy server will now respond back to the client, as we can see it in this particular diagram. So now in this scenario, we are going to, in the next lecture, we are going to see how we can make use of a tool called Bobsuit to now act as a web proxy server to sit in between our client web browser and the web server that we are making a request to. So in that scenario, whenever our client make a post request to the web server, now that request will be channeled to the Bobsuit, and then we can be able to see the content that is stored in the post request that client is trying to request from the web server, and then we can be able to modify it and inject our web shell and inject our malicious script so as to we can tamper with the request. We can see the post request, even though the post request we can't see it on the client browser as we have seen in the previous lecture. The request of the post request, the resource that the client is requesting for from the web server is stored in the URL, so we can't see it. But if the request is channeled to the proxy server, now we can be able to see it and then modify it using our Bobsuit, which is now acting as the proxy server before channeling that request to the web server. So basically, a proxy server is a server. In this case, is a proxy web server that sits in between the client machine and the web server, so that whatsoever is the request that the client is making to the web server will first of all go to the proxy server, and then the proxy server will now channel the request to the web server on behalf of the client. And then when the web server responded, the web server will not respond back directly to the client. It will respond back to the proxy server, and now the proxy server will now respond back to the client machine that made the initial request.